Billionaire CEO mocked the ex-pregnant wife as she moved to her ruined mansion after their divorce, unaware she had $170 million. "She's nothing without my money." Alexander Kane's voice echoed through his corner office as he posted the viral tweet, his 50 million followers about to witness his ex-wife's supposed downfall. The photo showed Victoria, visibly pregnant, standing before what looked like a dilapidated southern mansion. What he didn't know was that inside that ruined house sat legal documents worth $170 million, and the woman he just humiliated was about to inherit an empire that would make his billionaire status look like spare change. Before we get deep into today's story, I really want to know where you are watching from across the world. Please, drop in the comments section where you're watching. Hit the subscribe button if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow, I have created something very special just for you, another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Once again, welcome to Mr. Paul's Stories, where we come together like old friends, wrapped in the warmth of stories that light up our souls. Now, let's begin today's story. The morning mist clung to the wrought iron gates of Rosewood Manor like forgotten dreams, and Victoria Kane pressed her palm against the cold metal as she stared up at the antebellum mansion that would be her sanctuary. 6 months pregnant and newly divorced, she looked nothing like the polished socialite who once graced magazine covers beside her billionaire husband. Her designer clothes had been replaced by a simple sundress that accommodated her growing belly, her BMW traded for a modest Honda that now sat in the overgrown circular drive. The mansion loomed before her, its white columns stained with age, its wraparound porches sagging under the weight of neglect. Paint peeled from the shutters like old skin, and kudzu crept up the eastern wall with determined persistence. To anyone driving past on the tree-lined streets of Charleston's historic district, Rosewood Manor looked like a genteel ruin, a once grand southern belle fallen on hard times. Victoria smiled, running her fingers over the ornate key in her palm. If only they knew. "Miss Victoria?" came a gentle voice from behind her. She turned to see Marcus Williams, the estate's caretaker, a weathered black man in his 70s who had tended to Rosewood for 4 decades. His eyes crinkled with warmth as he approached, though she caught the concern in his gaze as it flickered to her rounded belly. "It's just Victoria now, Marcus," she said softly. "The Kane name doesn't suit me anymore." He nodded, understanding passing between them like an old song. "The house has been waiting for you, child. Been waiting a long time." As they walked up the cobblestone path, Victoria's phone buzzed with notifications, messages from former friends in Manhattan's elite circles, no doubt already spreading whispers about Alexander Kane's ex-wife moving to some rundown plantation house in the South. She silenced the phone without reading them. 3 miles might as well have been 3,000 between Charleston's quiet dignity and the steel and glass towers of Manhattan, but the distance felt even greater between who she was becoming and who she'd been forced to be. Meanwhile, 37 floors above the streets of New York, Alexander Kane stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, surveying his empire. Kane Industries stretched across multiple sectors: tech, real estate, manufacturing, with headquarters that gleamed like a monument to ambition. At 38, he was ruthless, brilliant, and utterly convinced that everything worth having could be measured in stock prices and quarterly reports. His assistant, Jennifer, knocked softly before entering. "Sir, the final divorce papers were filed. The Charleston property transfer is complete." Alexander didn't turn from the window. "Good. Let her have that old money pit. Probably cost more to repair than it's worth." His voice carried the crisp authority that had built his empire, but there was something else underneath, a hardness that hadn't been there 5 years ago when he'd first met Victoria at a charity gala in the Hamptons. "There's also this," Jennifer said, placing a tablet on his desk. "Social media posts about about Victoria." Now he did turn, his steel-gray eyes narrowing as he scrolled through the images. Victoria, visibly pregnant, standing before what looked like a dilapidated mansion. The comments were already brutal, from penthouse to poorhouse. Guess she should have signed a better prenup. Alexander Kane sure knows how to pick them. A cold smile played at the corners of his mouth. He'd built his reputation on never showing weakness, never backing down, never admitting a mistake. The divorce had been necessary. Victoria had grown too soft, too idealistic, always pushing him toward philanthropy and giving back when he should have been focused on growth. And when she'd announced her pregnancy just as their marriage was crumbling, he'd seen it for what it was, an attempt to trap him. "Schedule a press release," he said, his fingers already moving across his phone's keyboard. "Kane Industries is focusing on strategic expansion. Personal matters won't distract from our mission." But even as he typed the cold corporate words, Alexander found himself staring at the photo of Victoria. She looked different. Peaceful, almost. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and despite the obvious pregnancy and modest surroundings, there was a dignity about her that he'd forgotten. A strength that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper than the surface. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. Sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. He had a company to run, shareholders to please, and a reputation to maintain. Whatever game Victoria was playing with this move to Charleston, it wouldn't affect him. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother in the Hamptons. "Saw the photos, darling. Perhaps you should check on her. That baby is your grandchild." Alexander deleted the message without responding. Back in Charleston, as the afternoon sun painted Rosewood Manor in golden hues, Victoria stood in the grand foyer, her hand resting on her belly as she felt the baby kick. The house seemed to breathe around her, creaking floorboards, settling beams, the whisper of Spanish moss against old windows. It was alive in a way that their sterile Manhattan penthouse had never been. "The house has good bones," Marcus said, appearing beside her with a cup of sweet tea. "Just needs someone to love it back to life." Victoria accepted the glass gratefully, the cold condensation a relief against her palm. "My grandmother always said that about people too. Good bones, just needing love." As evening approached and Charleston's famous church bells began their twilight chorus, Victoria made her way to what had once been the mansion's library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls, though many of the books had long since been donated or lost to time. But in the center of the room sat an old oak desk, and upon it, a leather-bound journal that had belonged to her great-great-grandmother Elizabeth Chun. Victoria opened to the first page, where elegant script recorded the words, "A woman's true wealth is not in what she displays, but in what she quietly builds." Outside, fireflies began their ancient dance in the overgrown gardens, and Victoria smiled as she felt her daughter, for she knew somehow it would be a daughter, respond to the peaceful rhythm of this new life. Tomorrow, the world would continue to watch and whisper, but tonight, in this beautiful ruin of a house, she was exactly where she needed to be. Her phone buzzed once more with notifications from New York, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she placed both hands on her belly and made a promise to the life growing within her. "You'll know your worth from the very beginning, little one. No one will ever make you forget it." The first act was ending, but Victoria Chen's story was just beginning. What do you think Victoria's secret is? And do you believe Alexander deserves a second chance, or has he burned too many bridges? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts on these complex relationships. The notification sound on Alexander's phone had been chiming incessantly for the past hour, but he'd been too absorbed in the quarterly projections spread across his mahogany desk to pay attention. Kane Industries stock had jumped 3 points overnight, and the expansion into the Pacific Northwest was ahead of schedule. Success had a rhythm, and Alexander had learned to dance to its relentless beat. "Sir." Jennifer's voice carried an unusual tension as she entered his office. "You need to see this." Alexander glanced up, irritated by the interruption. The Seattle deal can wait. I'm reviewing. It's not about Seattle. She placed her tablet in front of him, her fingers trembling slightly. It's about the post you made yesterday. Alexander frowned, scrolling to his social media account. He barely remembered posting anything, just a quick, dismissive comment about moving forward and not looking back. But there it was, posted at 11:47 p.m. after 3 glasses of scotch and a particularly brutal board meeting. A reposted photo of Victoria standing in front of Rosewood Manor, visibly pregnant and modestly dressed, with his caption, "When you realize some people were only worth what you gave them." From penthouse to plantation ruins, the truth always comes out. Hashtag moving on, hashtag no regrets. The post had exploded. 47,000 likes, 18,000 shares, and nearly 6,000 comments that ranged from supportive to absolutely vicious. Alexander's jaw tightened as he read through them. Savage. Alexander Kane doesn't play games. She looks pathetic. What did she expect marrying for money? That house looks like it should be condemned. Hope the baby doesn't catch something. King Kane knows how to cut dead weight. But it was the news articles that made his blood run cold. Billionaire CEO mocks pregnant ex-wife's living conditions. Alexander Kane's cruel social media attack goes viral. From power couple to public humiliation, the Kane divorce gets ugly. Jesus, he muttered, scrolling through screenshot after screenshot. The story had been picked up by business journals, gossip sites, and even mainstream news outlets. His personal life was bleeding into his professional reputation in ways he'd never anticipated. The board is asking questions, Jennifer said quietly. Mrs. Patterson from PR is having a breakdown. She's fielded 67 calls from reporters in the last 2 hours. Alexander stood abruptly, pacing to his window. The city stretched out below him like a conquered territory, but for the first time in years, he felt something that resembled panic crawling up his spine. Draft a statement. Corporate speak. Personal matters remain private, all that. Sir, there's more. He turned, and the expression on Jennifer's face made his stomach drop. Charleston's Historic Preservation Society issued a statement. Apparently, Mrs. Kane Victoria isn't just living in any old house. Rosewood Manor is, it's significant. Built in 1847, survived the Civil War, been in the Chen family for over a century. They're calling your post an attack on Southern heritage and a grieving pregnant woman. The words hit Alexander like physical blows. Grieving? The Chen family? Victoria had never mentioned. But then again, when was the last time he'd actually listened to her talk about her family, her history, anything that wasn't directly related to his world? Meanwhile, in Charleston, Victoria sat in Rosewood Manor's sun-dappled breakfast room, her laptop open to the storm of comments and shares that had taken over her life without her permission. Marcus had found her there an hour ago, tears streaming down her face as she read the cruelest remarks about her appearance, her pregnancy, her worth as a human being. "Don't you read another word of that poison," Marcus had said firmly, but Victoria couldn't stop scrolling. Each comment was a small knife, cutting away at whatever composure she'd managed to build over the past few weeks. Her phone rang, unknown number with a New York area code. "Mrs. Kane? This is Rebecca Martinez from CNN. We'd love to get your response to your ex-husband's viral post. Do you have a statement about?" Victoria hung up. The phone immediately rang again. Then again. She turned it off and sat in the sudden quiet, her hands shaking as she placed them over her belly. "I'm sorry, little one," she whispered. "I'm so sorry you're going to be born into this mess." But as she sat there, something began to shift inside her. The tears dried, replaced by something harder, cleaner. Alexander had always underestimated her, during their marriage, during the divorce, and clearly now. He saw her as weak, as someone who had been worth only what he gave her. If only he knew. Victoria walked to the old secretary desk in the corner of the breakfast room and pulled out a thick manila folder. Inside were documents that would change everything. Bank statements from 3 different Swiss accounts, investment portfolios managed by the most discreet firms in Geneva, and property deeds spanning from Napa Valley to the Hamptons. The inheritance from her great-aunt Margaret Chun, a reclusive tech pioneer who had died 18 months ago, had been kept secret at the lawyer's insistence until all estate matters were settled. $170 million. More money than Alexander had ever imagined she possessed. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the assumptions, the casual cruelty, the way he'd reduced her to nothing more than a failed investment in his personal portfolio. The Alexander she'd fallen in love with 5 years ago would never have written those words, would never have exposed her to public humiliation while she carried his child. Victoria picked up her laptop and, for the first time in years, logged into the social media account she'd abandoned when their marriage started falling apart. Her verification checkmark was still there. Victoria Chun, formerly of Chen Digital Arts, the graphic design firm she'd sold just before their wedding. She'd been worth $12 million in her own right then, though Alexander had dismissed it as cute startup money. She began to type, her fingers moving with steady precision. To those who think a woman's worth is measured by her surroundings, Rosewood Manor has weathered storms that would destroy glass towers. It has sheltered generations of strong women who built their legacies not on what they displayed, but on what they quietly accomplished. I am proud to call it home, and prouder still to raise my daughter here, where she'll learn that true strength comes from character, not bank accounts. #RosewoodStrong, #built to last. She attached a single photo, not of herself, but of the mansion's library, golden afternoon light streaming through tall windows onto shelves of leather-bound books, the portrait of her great-great-grandmother Elizabeth Chun hanging above the fireplace in quiet dignity. Victoria hesitated for only a moment before hitting post. Then she closed the laptop and walked out onto the wraparound porch, where the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of church bells reminded her that there were worse things than being underestimated. Back in Manhattan, Alexander's phone exploded with new notifications. Victoria's post was gaining traction faster than his had, but the tone was completely different. Comments poured in. Class. This is how a real woman handles trolls. That house is gorgeous. I looked it up. It's worth at least $8 million restored. Alexander Kane just got schooled by someone with actual grace. She didn't even mention him by name. That's what real power looks like. Alexander stared at the photo she'd posted. He recognized it now. Victoria had shown him pictures of Rosewood Manor years ago, back when they were first dating. She'd talked about her grandmother's stories, about wanting to restore it someday, about the history embedded in its walls. He'd been checking emails during the conversation, dismissing it as sentimental nonsense. But looking at the image now, the dignity of that room, the weight of history in every detail, he felt something crack inside his chest. Victoria had never looked at their Manhattan penthouse the way she'd looked when describing this place. She'd never belonged in his world of steel and glass and quarterly profits. She'd been homesick for a place he'd never bothered to understand. "Sir." Jennifer appeared at his door, her face pale. Victoria Chen's post is trending. #RosewoodStrong is at number 3 nationally. And sir, there's something else. Alexander looked up, though part of him no longer wanted to know. Charleston's mayor issued a statement. They're declaring Rosewood Manor a protected historic site. And there's going to be a feature story in Southern Living magazine about Mrs. Kane's graceful response to cyberbullying. The reporter wants to know if you'd like to comment. The walls of Alexander's office seemed to close in around him. In trying to diminish Victoria, he'd made her a symbol of dignity in the face of cruelty. In mocking her new home, he'd drawn attention to its historical significance. In reducing her to nothing, he'd given her a platform to show the world exactly who she was. And who she was, Alexander was beginning to realize, was someone he'd never really known at all. Victoria's response was pure class, but do you think Alexander is starting to realize what he's lost? And what do you make of that mysterious inheritance? Drop your predictions in the comments. We have a feeling this story is about to get even more intense. The screenshot had been shared 43,000 times. Victoria stared at her phone in the morning light filtering through Rosewood Manor's tall windows, watching the numbers climb with each refresh. Alexander's post, a split image of their former Manhattan penthouse beside a grainy photo of her Charleston mansion, had become internet folklore overnight. His caption still burned in her mind, "Some people peak early. Grateful I learned to aim higher." Hashtag moving on, hashtag success mindset, hashtag no regrets. But it wasn't just his cruelty that stung. It was the comments. Thousands of strangers dissecting her life, her choices, her worth, as if she were a cautionary tale rather than a human being carrying his child. "Miss Victoria, you need to eat something." Marcus appeared in the doorway of the sunroom where she'd been sitting since dawn, carrying a tray of scrambled eggs and fresh biscuits. His weathered face creased with concern as he took in her untouched breakfast from the day before. "I'm not hungry, Marcus." She set the phone face down on the wicker table, but her hands trembled slightly. "Did you see?" "I don't pay attention to what fools say on the internet," he said firmly, setting the fresh tray down with gentle authority. "But I do pay attention when someone under my care forgets to take care of herself and that baby." Victoria's hand moved instinctively to her belly, now prominently rounded at 7 months. The baby had been restless all night, as if sensing her mother's distress. "He doesn't know about her," she whispered. "He thinks this is all some desperate attempt to what? Win him back." Marcus pulled up a chair beside her, his joints creaking as he settled down. "Child, I've been taking care of this house and the folks in it for 40 years. Your great-grandmother Elizabeth, your grandmother Rose, your mama before she passed, all strong women who faced down storms much fiercer than some fool with a computer. But they didn't have the whole world watching," Victoria said, her voice breaking slightly. "They didn't have their private pain turned into entertainment for strangers." "No," Marcus agreed quietly. "But they had something that boy up in New York ain't learned yet. They knew the difference between making noise and making a difference. Between showing off wealth and building something that lasts." Meanwhile, in Manhattan's financial district, Alexander paced his office like a caged predator, his usual composure fractured by the unexpected aftermath of his social media post. What had started as a calculated move to control the narrative had spiraled into something else entirely. "Sir, we have a problem," Jennifer said, entering with a stack of printed emails and her tablet clutched against her chest. "The Hartwell Foundation just pulled out of the merger. They're citing concerns about corporate character and values alignment." Alexander's jaw clenched. The Hartwell Foundation represented a $2 billion deal he'd been cultivating for 8 months. What exactly did they say? "They said." Jennifer hesitated, then read directly from her screen. "We cannot in good conscience partner with an organization whose leadership demonstrates such callous disregard for family values and human dignity. Mr. Kane's public humiliation of his pregnant ex-wife reflects a character incompatible with our mission." The words hit Alexander like physical blows. He'd built Kane Industries on the principle that business was business. Emotions had no place in boardrooms or balance sheets. But now his personal life was bleeding into his professional empire, threatening everything he'd worked to build. "Get me Harrison Hartwell on the phone," he snapped. "Sir," I tried. His assistant said he's unavailable indefinitely for Kane Industries business. Alexander moved to his window, gripping the frame as he stared down at the streets below. 43,000 shares and climbing. What had he been thinking? The post had been impulsive, a moment of wounded pride when he'd seen Victoria looking so content, so peaceful. It had enraged him in ways he couldn't articulate. His phone buzzed with a text from his brother James in Los Angeles. Really, Alex? Publicly mocking a pregnant woman? Mom's having a fit, and honestly, so am I. This isn't you. But that was the problem. It was him. Or at least, it was who he'd become. Somewhere in the relentless pursuit of success, he'd lost the ability to distinguish between strength and cruelty, between protecting himself and destroying others. Another text, this one from his mother. Your father would be ashamed. Come home. We need to talk. Alexander deleted both messages, but his hands were shaking. Back in Charleston, Victoria had finally managed a few bites of Marcus's biscuits when her phone rang. The caller ID showed her lawyer, Patricia Wells, calling from Atlanta. Victoria, honey, are you all right? Patricia's voice carried both legal sharpness and maternal concern. I've been fielding calls all morning about Alexander's post. I'm fine, Victoria lied, settling back into the wicker chair. Well, as fine as someone can be when their ex-husband turns them into a viral joke. That's why I'm calling. We need to discuss your options. What he did could constitute harassment, possibly defamation. With your resources, we could make him very sorry he ever touched that keyboard. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, watching a pair of cardinals build their nest in the ancient oak outside her window. What kind of message would that send to my daughter, Patricia? That when someone hurts us, we hurt them back harder. It would send the message that actions have consequences, Patricia said firmly. And that no one, not even Alexander Kane, can publicly humiliate you without facing the music. Maybe, Victoria said softly. Or maybe it would just prove his point, that I'm desperate, grasping, trying to drag him down because I can't build myself up. Victoria. Patricia's voice gentled. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You know what you're worth. After ending the call, Victoria made her way through the mansion's halls, her footsteps echoing off hardwood floors that had weathered 2 centuries of joy and sorrow. She paused at the portrait gallery, where generations of strong women gazed down from oil-painted frames, women who had survived wars, economic collapse, social upheaval, and heartbreak. Her great-great-grandmother Elizabeth, who had built a shipping empire while raising 5 children alone after her husband's death. Her great-grandmother Rose, who had turned a small textile business into a manufacturing dynasty during the Depression. Her grandmother Catherine, who had quietly revolutionized sustainable farming across the Southeast. And her mother Diana, whose gentle smile in the portrait belied the steel beneath. Diana, who had taught Victoria that true power whispered while false power shouted. Victoria pressed her palm against her belly, feeling her daughter's strong kick. Your great-grandmothers were fighters, little one, she murmured. But they fought for something bigger than revenge. They built legacies that mattered. Her phone buzzed again, another notification about Alexander's post. This time, she turned it off completely. In Manhattan, as evening fell across the city's glittering skyline, Alexander found himself in an unusual position, alone in his penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of success but feeling utterly hollow. The Hartwell Foundation withdrawal had been just the beginning. 2 more potential partners had expressed concerns, and his publicist had quit via email, citing irreconcilable differences in values. He poured himself 3 fingers of 30-year-old scotch and sank into his leather chair, the same chair where he'd made the decision to divorce Victoria 18 months ago. Where he'd convinced himself that her softness was weakness, her compassion a liability, her desire for family a distraction from his ambitions. The apartment felt cavernous without her presence. No soft laughter from the kitchen, where she'd cooked despite having a full staff. No classical music drifting from her art studio. No gentle questions about his day that had once annoyed him but now seemed precious in their absence. His laptop sat open on the coffee table, showing the continuing explosion of his post. But now, mixed among the supportive comments from those who admired his strength, were others that made his stomach turn. Imagine being so insecure you have to publicly shame the mother of your child. She's better off without him. Look at her, she's glowing. He's just bitter. Some people are rich in money, others are rich in character. We can see which one he chose. Alexander closed the laptop with more force than necessary. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The post was meant to control the narrative, to show the world that he was moving forward, unaffected by the divorce, focused on success. Instead, it had revealed something ugly about himself that he wasn't ready to face. His phone rang, his mother again. "This time," he answered. "Alexander James Kane," came Eleanor Kane's crisp voice from the Hamptons. "What in heaven's name were you thinking?" "Hello, Mother." "Don't you hello, Mother me. I just spent the afternoon on the phone with 3 different bored wives, all asking me to explain why my son is publicly humiliating a pregnant woman. Do you have any idea how this looks?" Alexander rubbed his temples where a headache was building. "It looks like I'm not letting anyone walk all over me. It looks like you're a small petty man who can't handle the fact that his ex-wife has more grace in her little finger than he has in his entire body," Eleanor snapped. "Victoria is carrying your grandchild, Alexander. My grandchild. And you're treating her like she's some gold-digging opportunist instead of the woman who loved you enough to put up with your nonsense for 5 years." "She left me," Alexander said quietly. "She left because you gave her no choice. Because you became someone she couldn't recognize anymore. Someone I can barely recognize." The line went quiet for a moment, filled only with the distant sound of waves against the Hamptons shore. "Your father built this family's reputation on integrity, Alexander. On treating people with respect, especially those who couldn't fight back. What you did today, it would break his heart." After his mother hung up, Alexander sat in the growing darkness of his penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like fallen stars. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to remember Victoria as she really was, not the soft obstacle to his ambitions that he'd convinced himself she'd become, but the woman who had seen something in him worth loving. The woman who had laughed at his terrible jokes and challenged his assumptions. Who had made him want to be better, not just more successful. Who had cried when he'd surprised her with weekend trips to small towns where they could be anonymous, just Alexander and Victoria, not the power couple from the society pages. He pulled up her number on his phone, his thumb hovering over the call button. But what would he say? That he was sorry? That the post had been a mistake? That seeing her look so peaceful in Charleston had triggered something primitive and ugly in him, a need to tear down what he couldn't possess? Instead, he set the phone aside and poured another scotch. In Charleston, as the night deepened around Rosewood Manor, Victoria finally allowed herself to cry. She sat in her great-grandmother's rocking chair on the front porch, wrapped in a hand-quilted blanket that had comforted generations of women in her family, and let the tears come. But they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of release, for the marriage that had slowly died, for the man Alexander had become, for the innocence she was losing about the cruelty people were capable of when they felt cornered. "It's going to be okay, sweet girl," she whispered to her unborn daughter. "We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be extraordinary." As if in response, the baby settled into a peaceful rhythm, and Victoria felt her own heartbeat slow to match. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more whispers, more attempts to define her worth by others' standards. But tonight, surrounded by the strength of generations, she made a choice. She would not retreat. She would not retaliate. She would simply be who she had always been, a woman who knew that true power came not from tearing others down, but from building something beautiful, something lasting, something worthy of the legacy she carried. The resistance was over. The real battle was about to begin. Alexander's post backfired spectacularly, but Victoria is choosing the high road. Do you think she's being too forgiving, or is this the kind of strength that really matters? And what do you think Alexander should do to make this right, if it's even possible? Share your thoughts below. The morning after their night in the hospital chapel, Victoria woke in her own bed at Rosewood Manor with sunlight streaming through the tall windows and the baby moving gently within her. For the first time in months, she had slept peacefully, and she knew it had everything to do with the man who had held her hand through her darkest hour. Alexander had left early, but not before ensuring Marcus had her doctor's number and promising to check on her later. As Victoria made her way downstairs, she found Marcus in the kitchen, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee, his expression thoughtful. "That man's got ghosts," Marcus said without preamble, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had seen decades of human drama unfold within these walls. "Same kind you've been carrying, child." Victoria poured herself a cup of herbal tea, her movements careful and deliberate. "What do you mean?" Marcus rose and walked to one of the kitchen's tall windows that overlooked the gardens. "Been taking care of this house for 43 years. Seen 3 generations of your family come and go. Your great-grandmother Elizabeth, she used to sit right where you're sitting, telling me about the weight of secrets." Marcus. Victoria's voice carried a warning, but also curiosity. "Time you knew the whole truth about this place, Victoria. About why your grandmother left it to you, and why she made sure certain information stayed sealed until you were ready." He disappeared into what had once been the butler's pantry and returned with an ornate wooden box, its surface carved with intricate Chinese characters intertwined with southern magnolia blossoms. Victoria's breath caught. She remembered this box from childhood visits, always sitting on her grandmother's mantelpiece, always forbidden. "Your great-great-grandmother Elizabeth wasn't just wealthy, child. She was one of the most successful silent investors of her time. Chinese-American women weren't supposed to own property, run businesses, or accumulate wealth in 1920s Charleston, but Elizabeth found ways. She bought this mansion when it was going to be demolished, saved it, and turned it into the crown jewel of a financial empire that stretched from Charleston to San Francisco." Marcus opened the box, revealing documents, photographs, and what appeared to be stock certificates. She hid her investments behind layers of trusts and shell companies, all legal, all brilliant. When she died, she left instructions that the full inheritance would only be released to a female descendant who had proven she could handle both wealth and hardship. Victoria's hands trembled as she reached for a photograph. Elizabeth Chun standing in front of Rosewood Manor in 1925, wearing a simple dress but with eyes that sparkled with intelligence and determination. Beneath the photo was a letter in elegant script. "To my great-great-granddaughter. If you are reading this, you have learned that true strength comes not from what others give you, but from what you build yourself. The $170 million in the Charleston Trust is yours, but more importantly, you now understand its purpose." $170 million? Victoria whispered, sinking into her chair. "Plus accumulated interest and investments over the decades. Your grandmother and your mother both chose not to claim it. They married wealthy men and felt they didn't need it. But Elizabeth's will specified it would pass to the next generation if unclaimed. She was waiting for someone who would understand its true value." Victoria stared at the documents, her mind reeling. All those months of Alexander treating her like she was dependent on him, all those comments about her being lucky to have married into wealth, all that time she had felt small and powerless. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. Because Elizabeth's instructions were clear, the inheritance could only be revealed to someone who had experienced both privilege and hardship, who understood the difference between earned respect and given comfort. Your divorce, your pregnancy, your choice to come here instead of fighting Alexander in court. It triggered the release clause. Meanwhile, across town at the Bellman Charleston Place Hotel, Alexander sat in his suite, his laptop open to financial reports, but his mind entirely elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's face in the hospital chapel, the way she had whispered about feeling invisible, about losing herself in their marriage. His phone rang, his private investigator, Thomas Brady, calling from New York. "Alex, I've got some information about your ex-wife's family background. You're not going to believe this. Just give me the basics, Tom. The Rosewood Manor she's living in? It's not some falling-down old house. It's a registered historical landmark worth at least $15 million, and that's before renovations. But here's the kicker. I traced the property records and family trusts. The Chin family has been sitting on significant old money for generations." Alexander's blood ran cold. "How significant?" "I'm still digging, but preliminary records show trust accounts, investment portfolios. Alex, your ex-wife might be worth more than you initially thought. A lot more." The line went quiet as Alexander processed this information. All his assumptions, all his cruel comments about her moving to a rundown plantation house, all his certainty that she had been lucky to marry him. "Keep digging," he said finally. "I need to know everything." After hanging up, Alexander found himself walking the historic streets of Charleston, something he never did in New York. The city's ancient charm seemed to seep into his consciousness. The horse-drawn carriages, the antebellum architecture, the Spanish moss hanging like nature's chandeliers. He understood why Victoria had chosen this place. His steps led him, almost without conscious thought, back to Rosewood Manor. This time, in the afternoon light, he really looked at the property. The peeling paint was actually a carefully maintained patina that preserved the historical integrity. The overgrown gardens were actually expertly maintained heritage plants that would cost a fortune to establish. The sagging porches showed the gentle settling of a house that had stood strong for nearly 2 centuries. He had been looking at everything through the lens of his own aesthetic, steel and glass and contemporary lines, and had completely missed the quiet elegance of what Victoria had chosen. As he stood at the gates, Victoria emerged from the house, moving slowly but gracefully despite her pregnancy. She wore a flowing dress in soft blue, her dark hair caught up in a simple bun, and she looked like she belonged to this place in a way she had never belonged to their Manhattan penthouse. "Alexander." She approached the gate, surprise evident in her voice. "Is everything all right?" He struggled to find words. I wanted to check on you. After last night." She unlocked the gate and gestured for him to follow her up the path. "Marcus made too much lunch. Would you like to join us?" As they walked toward the house, Alexander found himself really seeing the property for the first time. The craftsmanship in the ironwork, the quality of the stonework, the way every detail spoke of both wealth and taste. This wasn't the desperate refuge of a woman with nowhere else to go. This was the chosen sanctuary of someone who understood true value. "Victoria," he said as they reached the front porch, "there's something I need to ask you." She turned, one hand resting on her belly, her expression open but guarded. "What is it?" "This house, your family. I'm beginning to think I may have misunderstood some things." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "What kinds of things?" He gestured at the mansion, at the grounds, at the obvious care and expense that had gone into maintaining the property. "I assumed. I thought you came here because you had nowhere else to go. And now I'm wondering if you came here because it's where you wanted to be." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. Finally, she spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "Alexander, do you remember what you said to me the day you asked for the divorce?" He winced. "I said a lot of things I shouldn't have. You said that I should be grateful for the life you had given me, that without you I would have nothing." She paused, her hand moving protectively over her belly. "You made me feel like I was lucky you had chosen me, like my worth was tied to being your wife." "Victoria, She held up a hand, stopping him. "Let me finish. The truth is, Alexander, I never needed you to give me a life. I chose to share my life with you. There's a difference." As if summoned by the weight of her words, Marcus appeared on the porch, carrying a leather portfolio that Alexander recognized as the type used for important financial documents. "Miss Victoria," Marcus said quietly, "perhaps it's time." She nodded, taking the portfolio from him. "Alexander, there's something you should know about me, about my family, about why I never fought you for money in the divorce." She opened the portfolio, revealing documents that made Alexander's breath catch. Trust fund statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, all bearing Victoria's name, all showing figures that made his own wealth seem modest by comparison. $170 million, she said quietly. "Plus this property, plus several other investments my great-great-grandmother established nearly a century ago. I never needed your money, Alexander. I married you because I loved you." The words hit him like a physical blow. Every assumption, every cruel comment, every moment of superiority he had felt, all of it crumbled in an instant. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered. "Because I wanted you to love me for who I was, not what I had. I wanted us to build something together based on partnership, not power." Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "When you started treating me like I was dependent on you, like I should be grateful for your success, I realized you had never really seen me at all." Alexander stared at the documents, his mind reeling. "The social media posts, the things I said about you moving to a rundown house, are still online," she said softly. "Still causing me humiliation every day." He looked up at her, seeing clearly for the first time the woman he had married, brilliant, strong, independent, and carrying his child despite everything he had put her through. "Victoria, I am so sorry. I have been such a fool." She closed the portfolio, her movements careful and controlled. "Yes," she said simply. "You have been." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch as they stood there, the weight of revelation hanging between them like Spanish moss, beautiful, ancient, and impossible to ignore. Now that the truth is out, do you think Alexander can truly change, or is Victoria better off without him? And what would you do if you were in Victoria's position? Forgive or move on? Share your thoughts below. The Charleston morning dawned soft and golden, Spanish moss swaying like dancers in the gentle breeze that carried the scent of magnolias and the distant salt of the harbor. Victoria sat on the restored front porch of Rosewood Manor, a steaming cup of chicory coffee warming her hands as she watched Alexander's rental car pull through the gates she'd had Marcus repair just days before. He looked different in the daylight, smaller somehow, though he still carried himself with that familiar authority. His designer suit seemed out of place against the backdrop of ancient oaks and climbing roses, like a Wall Street Journal photograph accidentally inserted into a Southern Living magazine. "The doctors said you stayed all night," Victoria said quietly as he climbed the porch steps, his expensive shoes clicking against the old wood. Alexander paused at the top step, his gray eyes taking in the transformed space around him. Where yesterday he'd seen decay, now he noticed the careful restoration, the freshly painted columns, the polished brass fixtures, the way the morning light caught the beveled glass of the front doors. "I couldn't leave," he admitted, his voice rougher than usual. "Not until I knew you were both safe." Victoria gestured to the wicker chair beside her, the one Marcus had painted white just that morning. For a moment, Alexander hesitated. When was the last time he'd simply sat somewhere without an agenda, without a meeting to attend or a deal to close? "The coffee's good," Victoria offered, pouring a second cup from the silver service that had belonged to her great-grandmother. "Marcus grows the beans himself in the greenhouse." As Alexander settled into the chair, he caught sight of Victoria's profile in the morning light. The harsh fluorescent glare of the hospital had hidden what he now saw clearly. She was radiant. Pregnancy had softened the sharp edges that Manhattan's relentless pace had carved into her features, replacing them with something deeper, more luminous. "I owe you an explanation," he said, accepting the coffee cup, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The simple touch sent an unexpected jolt through him. When had he last touched another person without calculation, without purpose beyond the simple human need for connection? "You don't owe me anything, Alexander." Victoria's voice held no bitterness, only a weary kind of acceptance that somehow hurt more than anger would have. "We're divorced. Your obligations ended when those papers were signed." "No," he said firmly, setting down the cup with a clink against the saucer. "No, they didn't. That baby you're carrying, she's my daughter too." Victoria's hand moved instinctively to her rounded belly. "How did you know it was a girl?" For the first time since he'd arrived, Alexander smiled, not the practiced corporate expression he wore in boardrooms, but something genuine and tentative. "Dr. Martinez told me while you were sleeping. Said you'd given permission for me to know." He paused, studying her face. "Why?" The question hung in the morning air between them, weighted with months of pain and misunderstanding. Victoria was quiet for so long that Alexander wondered if she'd heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because despite everything that's broken between us, despite all the cruel words and cold silences, she's still half you. And the part of you that I fell in love with 5 years ago, that man who stayed up all night reading to children at the hospital charity event, who cried watching old movies, who used to leave little notes in my coffee cup, he's still in there somewhere." Alexander felt something crack open in his chest, a fissure in the armor he'd spent years perfecting. "That man was weak," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "That man was human," Victoria corrected gently. "And I miss him." They sat in comfortable silence as Charleston awakened around them. A mockingbird performed its elaborate song from the ancient oak that shaded the porch, cycling through a dozen different calls with virtuosic precision. In the distance, the bells of St. Philip's Church marked the hour with their familiar bronze voices. "Tell me about this place," Alexander said eventually, his business-trained eye taking in details he'd missed in yesterday's emotional chaos. The restoration work was extensive but subtle, preserving the mansion's historic character while obviously requiring significant investment. "How long have you owned it?" Victoria's smile held secrets. "It's been in my family for 4 generations. My great-great-grandmother Elizabeth Chun bought it in 1924 with money she'd saved from running a small import business. Back then, a Chinese woman owning property in Charleston was unusual." "Chun," Alexander repeated, the name clicking into place with details he'd somehow never absorbed during their marriage. "Your maiden name. But I thought your family was from California." "My parents moved west when I was young. But our roots are here, in Charleston." Elizabeth was extraordinary. She built something beautiful from nothing, at a time when the world told her she couldn't. Victoria's fingers traced the carved armrest of her chair. "This house, this land, it's been waiting for me to come home." As she spoke, Alexander found himself studying her with new eyes. During their marriage, he'd categorized Victoria as old Charleston money, assuming her quiet confidence came from generations of established wealth. But listening to her now, he began to understand that her strength had been forged in struggle, shaped by ancestors who'd fought for every dream they'd achieved. I never asked about your family, he realized aloud, the admission carrying the weight of recognition. In 5 years of marriage, I never really asked. You were busy building an empire, Victoria said without accusation. I understood that. What I didn't understand was when you stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as another asset to manage. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. When had he started scheduling their conversations? When had her dreams for their future become obstacles to his ambition? The night you told me about the baby, Alexander said slowly, I thought you were trying to trap me. Thought you'd planned it to save a marriage that was already failing. Victoria's laugh was soft and sad. Our marriage was failing because we'd forgotten how to talk to each other without it being a negotiation. The baby wasn't a trap, Alexander. She was hope. Hope that maybe having something bigger than ourselves to love might remind us how to love each other. A gentle breeze stirred the Spanish moss, and with it came the sound of Marcus humming as he tended the roses that climbed the mansion's eastern wall. The old caretaker had given them privacy, but his presence was a comfort, a reminder that love could be patient, steady, enduring. I've been thinking, Alexander said, his voice tentative in a way that would have surprised his board of directors. About what Dr. Martinez said. About stress and the baby's health. Alexander. Let me finish. Please. He turned to face her fully, and Victoria saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability, raw and unguarded. I know I have no right to ask this. I know I've burned bridges that maybe can't be rebuilt. But I want to be here. For the birth, for the baby, for whatever you'll allow me to be. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly as she felt their daughter respond to the sound of her father's voice. The baby always seemed to recognize Alexander, even through all the anger and hurt. Perhaps children, even unborn ones, were wiser than adults about what really mattered. There's a guest cottage, she said finally, gesturing toward a small building barely visible through the oak trees. It needs some work, but it's habitable. Marcus has been using it for storage, but we could clear it out. Alexander's breath caught. You'd let me stay? For the baby, Victoria clarified quickly. So she can know her father. So you can be part of her life from the beginning. But even as she said it, both of them knew it was about more than the baby. It was about second chances and the fragile hope that broken things could sometimes be mended, that love, even wounded love, might be stronger than pride. I'll need to fly back to New York occasionally, Alexander said. Board meetings, critical decisions. But I can work remotely for the most part. The company won't collapse if I'm not physically in the building every day. Victoria raised an eyebrow. Alexander Kane admitting his empire can function without his constant oversight? Maybe there's hope for us all. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Jennifer's been telling me that for years. Maybe it's time I listened. As the morning stretched into afternoon, they talked with a tentative honesty that felt both foreign and familiar. Alexander learned that Victoria had been quietly funding a scholarship program for underprivileged students, something she'd wanted to tell him about but had known he'd see as frivolous spending. Victoria discovered that Alexander's ruthless business persona masked a deep fear of failure, inherited from a father who'd built and lost 3 fortunes before Alexander was 21. I never wanted to be weak like him, Alexander admitted as they walked through Rosewood's gardens, past beds of roses that Marcus had coaxed back to blooming glory. Every decision I made was about building something that couldn't be taken away, couldn't be lost to sentiment or softness. But you can't build love like you build a company, Victoria said gently. Love requires trust, and trust requires vulnerability. The very things you trained yourself never to show. They paused beside a fountain that had recently been restored, its gentle splashing creating music in the garden air. A pair of cardinals, brilliant red male and subtly beautiful female, shared the fountain's edge, drinking side by side in perfect harmony. "I was vulnerable once," Alexander said quietly, watching the birds. "The night I asked you to marry me. Standing in that ridiculous rain outside your apartment, soaking wet because I couldn't wait for better weather to tell you I loved you." Victoria smiled at the memory. "You looked like a drowned businessman. But your eyes were so full of hope and terror and love that I couldn't have said no if I'd wanted to. When did I stop looking at you like that?" The question was barely audible, but Victoria heard it clearly. She turned to face him, studying the man she'd married, still handsome, still commanding, but now carrying a weight of regret that made him somehow more human, more real. "When you stopped believing I could love you for who you were instead of what you could provide," she said softly. "When you started performing even for me." As evening approached and Charleston's famous golden light began to paint everything in honeyed hues, they found themselves back on the porch. Victoria had changed into a flowing sundress that accommodated her growing belly, while Alexander had shed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, small concessions to the slower pace of Southern life. "There's something I need to tell you," Victoria said as Marcus appeared with a tray of sweet tea and his famous peach cobbler. The old caretaker's timing was impeccable. He always seemed to know when nourishment was needed for both body and soul. Alexander felt his chest tighten. "What is it?" Victoria reached into the small purse beside her chair and withdrew a folded piece of paper, old, yellowed with age, written in the same elegant script he'd seen in the mansion's guest book. "This is a letter from Elizabeth Chun to her daughter, written in 1943. Marcus found it in the library when we were cleaning." As Alexander unfolded the delicate paper, Victoria began to read aloud. "My dearest Rose, remember always that a woman's true wealth lies not in what she displays, but in what she quietly builds. The fortune I leave you is not just money. It is the knowledge that love multiplied is never diminished. Give freely, trust carefully, and never forget that the greatest investments are in human hearts." Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he absorbed the words. "Victoria, what are you telling me?" She met his eyes directly, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "Elizabeth didn't just build a successful import business, Alexander. She built a financial empire. One that she hid behind charitable trusts and family foundations for decades. This house, this land, it's not just my inheritance. It's the headquarters of the Chin Foundation. Assets worth approximately $170 million. The paper slipped from Alexander's fingers, fluttering to the porch floor like a fallen leaf. The mockingbird in the oak tree continued its elaborate song, but Alexander heard nothing except the roaring in his ears as the full weight of his ignorance, his cruelty, his assumptions crashed down around him. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that while I was mocking you for moving to a ruined mansion, while I was feeling superior about your supposed fall from grace, you were sitting on a fortune that rivals my own?" Victoria nodded, but there was no triumph in her expression, only sadness. "I wanted to tell you during our marriage. I tried to explain about the foundation, about the work I wanted us to do together. But you always said charity was a tax write-off, that real business was about profit, not sentiment." Alexander buried his face in his hands, the magnitude of his blindness overwhelming. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every assumption about Victoria's weakness, all of it built on ignorance so profound it took his breath away. "You must hate me," he whispered. "No," Victoria said softly, reaching across the space between their chairs to touch his hand. "I could never hate you, Alexander. Disappointed, yes. Heartbroken, absolutely. But not hate. Hate would require me to forget the man who used to read poetry to me on Sunday mornings, who learned to make my grandmother's dumpling recipe because he knew it made me feel connected to my heritage." The touch of her hand was gentle, tentative, but it anchored him in a moment when his entire worldview was shifting like sand beneath his feet. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he said, his voice cracking with emotion he'd spent years learning to suppress. "Maybe not," Victoria agreed, her honesty cutting deep. "But our daughter deserves parents who can model grace for her, who can show her that mistakes don't have to define us, that love can be stronger than pride." As the sun set over Charleston, painting Rosewood Manor in shades of gold and amber, two broken people sat in the gathering dusk and began to imagine what healing might look like. It would be neither quick nor easy, but for the first time in months, it felt possible. The fragile bridge between them was just beginning to form, built not on money or power or social position, but on the trembling hope that love, patient, forgiving, transformative love, might still be possible for two people brave enough to try again. Do you think Alexander truly understands the depth of his mistakes now? And should Victoria trust him with her heart again, or is she being too generous with her forgiveness? Share your thoughts. We're fascinated by how differently people view second chances in love. The morning after their tender moment in the garden felt like a dream Victoria wasn't sure she wanted to wake from. Sunlight streamed through the restored windows of Rosewood Manor as she sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, watching Alexander move with surprising ease around her kitchen. He'd insisted on making breakfast, something he claimed he hadn't done in years. "I forgot how peaceful mornings could be," he said, setting a plate of perfectly scrambled eggs before her. His sleeves were rolled up, his usually immaculate hair slightly mussed, and for a moment Victoria could see the man she'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. "It's the house," she said softly. "It has a way of stripping away everything unnecessary." Alexander sat across from her, his gray eyes holding a warmth she hadn't seen since their early days together. "Victoria, about last night." Her phone rang, cutting through the intimacy of the moment. The caller ID showed her lawyer's name, and something cold twisted in Victoria's stomach. "I should take this." "Victoria," came James Morrison's urgent voice. "We have a problem. A big one." She glanced at Alexander, who was watching her with growing concern. "What kind of problem?" "Someone leaked your financial information to the press. Not just the Chen inheritance, everything. The offshore accounts, the trust funds, the real estate holdings. Every detail of your wealth is about to be front-page news in less than an hour." The coffee cup slipped from Victoria's fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Alexander was immediately at her side, but she stepped away from his touch, her mind reeling. "How?" she whispered into the phone. "The information was sealed. The NDA. Someone with access to the Kane Industries legal files. The same files that handled your divorce proceedings. Victoria, there are only 3 people who had access to those sealed documents." Victoria's eyes met Alexander's, and she saw her own horror reflected in his face. The color had drained from his cheeks, and his mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. "I'll call you back," Victoria ended the call with shaking fingers. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Outside, she could hear Marcus tending to the garden, the peaceful sounds of morning carrying on as if her world hadn't just tilted off its axis. "Victoria," Alexander's voice was barely above a whisper. "I swear to you I didn't." "Didn't what?" Her voice was deadly quiet. "Didn't think I'd find out? Didn't think it would matter. I didn't leak anything." The desperation in his voice was raw, real. "You have to believe me. Why would I destroy this? Why would I ruin what we're building?" Victoria backed away from him, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. "Because that's what you do, Alexander. You use information. You leverage weaknesses. It's how you built your empire." "Not with you. Never with you." But even as he said it, Victoria could see the doubt creeping into his own eyes. She knew him too well, knew how his mind worked, how he compartmentalized, how he justified his actions in the name of business strategy. Her phone buzzed with notifications. Text messages, missed calls, social media alerts, all flooding in at once. With trembling fingers, she opened the first news alert. Kane's ex-wife's secret, $170 million fortune reveals. Sources close to Kane Industries confirmed that Victoria Chin Kane, recently divorced and thought to be financially struggling, is actually heir to a massive fortune including offshore accounts and extensive real estate holdings. No, 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 Victoria whispered, scrolling through article after article. Photos of Rosewood Manor were everywhere, but now they weren't showing a rundown mansion. They were showing one of Charleston's most valuable historic properties, recently renovated with unlimited resources. The narrative had flipped overnight. She wasn't the abandoned pregnant ex-wife seeking shelter in a ruin. She was the cunning woman who had manipulated public sympathy while sitting on a fortune. Alexander reached for her phone. "Victoria, let me see. Don't touch me." The words tore from her throat with such force that Alexander stumbled backward. "Don't you dare touch me." Her phone rang again. This time it was Jennifer, Alexander's assistant. "Mrs. Kane, Ms. Chun, I'm so sorry to call you directly, but there are reporters outside Kane Industries. They're asking about Mr. Kane's statement regarding your situation. He hasn't made any statement, but they're saying he's the source." Victoria ended the call and threw the phone onto the kitchen counter with such violence that the screen cracked. "My statement." Alexander's face was ashen. "Victoria, I never made any statement. I would never." "Wouldn't you?" Her voice was rising, all the composure she'd maintained for months finally shattering. "Isn't this exactly what you do? Isn't this your perfect revenge? Make me look like the manipulative gold digger you always suspected I was." "I never thought that. I never. You threw me away like I was nothing." The words came out as a scream, months of suppressed pain and humiliation pouring out all at once. "You made me sign papers that left me with nothing, made me feel grateful for the scraps of my own inheritance that I was allowed to keep, and then you watched the world mock me for being poor and desperate." Alexander stepped forward, his hands outstretched. "I was protecting you. The prenup, it was meant to protect both of us if things went wrong." "Protect me?" Victoria's laugh was bitter and broken. "You humiliated me. You let me be dragged through the media as your cast-off wife. Let people think I was some nobody who married for money and got what I deserved when you threw me out. I never said those things. You didn't have to. Your silence was loud enough." Tears were streaming down her face now, and she could feel the baby responding to her distress, kicking urgently against her ribs. "And now when I finally find peace, when I finally build something real and honest, you destroy it. You expose me, make me look like a liar, like someone who manipulated the world's sympathy for sport." Alexander's phone was buzzing incessantly. Through the window, Victoria could see cars pulling up outside the gates, reporters, photographers, all drawn by the scent of scandal. "We have to get ahead of this," Alexander said, his voice taking on that familiar corporate tone that Victoria hated. "I'll call my PR team, have them craft a statement that clarifies." "Stop." Victoria's voice was quiet now, deadly calm. "Just stop." She walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the reporters gathering like vultures at her gate. "Do you know what the worst part is, Alexander? For just one moment, one single moment last night, I thought maybe we could find our way back to each other. I thought maybe you had changed. Maybe you could love me and our baby more than you love your image. I do love you. I love you both more than." "No." She turned to face him, and Alexander felt his heart break at the devastation in her eyes. You love control. You love winning. And when you realized you were losing me, really losing me, you decided to destroy me instead. Victoria, please. Let me fix this. Let me find out who really. Get out. The words were quiet, but final. What? Get out of my house. Get out of my life. And stay away from my daughter. Our daughter, Alexander's voice cracked. Victoria, she's our. No. Victoria placed both hands on her belly, her stance protective and fierce. She's mine. My daughter will never know a father who would use her mother's pain for sport. She'll never know a man who can't tell the difference between love and possession. Alexander stood frozen, watching everything he'd just begun to hope for crumble around him. I didn't do this. I swear to you, on our daughter's life, I didn't leak that information. It doesn't matter, Victoria said, and Alexander realized with growing horror that she meant it. Because even if you didn't, you created the world where someone could. You built your empire on leverage and manipulation and using people's weaknesses against them. Your own assistant felt comfortable betraying my confidence because that's the culture you created. That's who you are. The sound of car doors slamming outside grew louder. Voices called out questions. Cameras flashed through the iron gates. Daddy. The word slipped out, not the sophisticated father she'd grown up saying, but the child's word she'd whispered in the garden the night before. Did you really love me at all? The question hung in the air between them like a physical thing, and Alexander saw in her eyes that whatever answer he gave, it was already too late. Before he could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway, his weathered face grave. Miss Victoria, there are reporters at the gate. They're asking a lot of questions, and some of them are getting aggressive about trying to come up the drive. Victoria nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. When she looked at Alexander again, her expression was empty, not angry anymore, just hollow. Marcus will show you out the back way, she said. There's a service road that connects to Broad Street. You can avoid the cameras. Victoria. Please. The word was barely audible. If you ever loved me at all, just go. Don't make this harder than it already is. Alexander wanted to fight, wanted to grab her and make her listen, make her believe. But as he looked at her face, at the woman carrying his child, standing in the ruins of their trust, he realized that some damage couldn't be undone with words. He followed Marcus through the back hallways of Rosewood Manor, past family portraits and heirloom furniture, past the life Victoria had built without him. At the service door, Marcus paused. She loves you still, you know, the older man said quietly. But love ain't always enough when trust is gone. Alexander nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. As he slipped out into the Charleston morning, he could hear the reporters at the front gate growing more insistent, their questions like arrows shot in the dark. Is it true you knew about her fortune all along? Was the divorce a publicity stunt? Are you planning to reconcile for financial reasons? Each question felt like another nail in the coffin of what they'd almost rebuilt. Back inside Rosewood Manor, Victoria sank into a chair at the kitchen table, her hands pressed to her belly as she felt her daughter's restless movements. The broken coffee cup still lay scattered across the floor, and she stared at the pieces, thinking of how some things, once shattered, could never be made whole again. Her phone buzzed with another call from her lawyer, but she ignored it. Outside, the reporters continued their vigil, and Victoria realized that her sanctuary had become her prison. But the worst part, the part that made her chest feel like it was caving in, was that deep in her heart, she still wasn't sure if Alexander had betrayed her or if someone else had. And that doubt, that tiny sliver of uncertainty, hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. Because if he was innocent, She had just destroyed the only chance they'd ever have at happiness. And if he was guilty, she had just learned that the man she loved was capable of cruelty beyond her worst imaginings. Either way, she was alone. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to her mother's pain, and Victoria whispered through her tears, "It's okay, little one. We'll be okay. We have to be." But for the first time since leaving New York, Victoria wasn't sure she believed her own words. The breaking point had been reached, and there was no going back. This is the moment that changes everything. Do you think Alexander is truly innocent, or has he shown his true colors? And can Victoria's trust ever be rebuilt, or are some betrayals too deep to forgive? Share your thoughts. We're dying to know where you stand on this heartbreaking turn of events. The rain hammered against the windows of Rosewood Manor like accusations, each drop a reminder of the storm that had torn through Victoria's carefully reconstructed world. 3 days had passed since Alexander's betrayal at the hospital, 3 days since she'd learned that his tenderness, his vulnerability, his desperate kiss, all of it had been captured and weaponized by the very media machine he claimed to despise. Victoria sat in the restored library, her hands resting on her 8-month belly, staring at the financial documents spread across the mahogany desk. The Chin Foundation's board had called an emergency meeting. Her reputation was in tatters, her privacy shredded, and worst of all, her unborn daughter would inherit this scandal alongside the family legacy. "Miss Victoria?" Marcus appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. "There's someone here to see you." She looked up, expecting perhaps another reporter or lawyer, but instead saw a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. Eleanor Kane, Alexander's mother, standing in the foyer with rain dripping from her designer coat. "I know you probably don't want to see anyone with a Kane name," Eleanor said softly, "but I had to come." Victoria studied the older woman, seeing traces of the son she'd once loved in the gentle curve of her smile. "Mrs. Kane, if you're here to defend Alexander—" "I'm here to tell you the truth about my son," Eleanor interrupted, her voice steady but pained. "The truth he's too proud to tell you himself." They sat in the morning room, where pale sunlight filtered through the restored stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns on the Persian rugs Victoria had carefully selected to bring the house back to life. "Alexander wasn't always like this," Eleanor began, accepting a cup of tea with trembling hands. "When his father died 10 years ago, something broke in him. David was controlling, demanding. He taught Alexander that showing emotion was weakness, that love was a luxury that successful men couldn't afford." Victoria remained silent, but her hand instinctively moved to her belly as the baby kicked. "The night before your wedding," Eleanor continued, "Alexander came to me in tears. He said he was terrified he'd hurt you the way his father hurt me, that he didn't know how to be the husband you deserved. I told him love was a choice you make every day, not a feeling you wait to have." "Then why?" Victoria's voice cracked. "Because he's his father's son in all the worst ways," Eleanor said sadly. "When you started pushing him toward charity work, toward being more than just a money-making machine, it terrified him. It meant admitting his father was wrong, that there was more to life than profit margins and power plays." The older woman reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "This came to my house this morning. Alexander had it delivered, along with a note saying I should give it to you if something happened to him." Victoria's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside were legal documents, transfer papers for 50% of Kane Industries shares, dated the day of their divorce. A sticky note in Alexander's handwriting read, "In case I'm too much of a coward to do the right thing." 50%? Victoria whispered. "He never filed them," Eleanor explained. "He's been carrying them around for 8 months, apparently. His assistant Jennifer told me he pulls them out sometimes during board meetings, just stares at them." Victoria felt tears threatening, but she forced them back. "Mrs. Kane, Your son betrayed me. He used my trust, my feelings, to manipulate a situation for his benefit. These papers don't change that." "No, they don't," Eleanor agreed. "But they might explain why he's been destroying himself ever since." Meanwhile, in a private room at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York, Alexander stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the dots in their textured surface for what felt like the 1,000th time. The heart attack hadn't been severe, stress-induced, the doctor said, but it had been enough to land him in intensive care for observation. Jennifer sat in the chair beside his bed, scrolling through her tablet with the grim efficiency that had made her indispensable. "The board is meeting tomorrow morning," she said without looking up. "There's talk of a vote of no confidence." "Let them," Alexander said quietly. "Sir. Let them vote. Let them take the company. I'm tired, Jen." He turned his head to look at her, and she was shocked to see tears in his steel-gray eyes. "I'm so goddamn tired of being the villain in everyone's story." Jennifer set down her tablet, her professional mask slipping for the first time in 5 years. "Mr. Kane, what happened at that hospital in Charleston?" Victoria's reaction: "It wasn't what we expected." "She looked at me like I was nothing," Alexander whispered. "Like I was exactly what I've spent 10 years proving I am. A man who destroys everything he touches." "You could still." "No." Alexander's voice was firm despite his weakness. "I've hurt her enough. The baby, the foundation, her reputation. I've poisoned it all. The best thing I can do now is disappear." But even as he spoke the words, his phone buzzed with a text message. Jennifer glanced at the screen and gasped. "Sir, it's from Victoria." Alexander's heart monitor beeped faster as he read the message. "Your mother visited today. We need to talk. Not about us, about our daughter. She deserves a father who fights for what's right, not what's easy. If you're ready to be that man, I'll be at Rosewood tomorrow at sunset. Come alone, or don't come at all. V." Jennifer watched as something shifted in her boss's expression, the first sign of real hope she'd seen in months. "Cancel my meetings," Alexander said, already reaching for the call button to summon a nurse. "All of them. Forever, if necessary." "Sir, the board meeting." "Jen, I'm about to either save my marriage or lose my company. Maybe both." He looked at her with a smile that reminded her why she believed in him all those years ago. "Help me check out of here. I have a choice to make." Back in Charleston, Victoria stood on the restored veranda of Rosewood Manor, watching the sun paint the Spanish moss golden in the ancient oak trees. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from board members, 43 from reporters, and countless text messages from friends and enemies alike, all wanting to know her next move. Marcus appeared beside her with a glass of sweet tea, his presence as steady as the tides. "You sure about this, child?" "No," Victoria admitted, one hand resting on her belly where their daughter seemed to be performing acrobatics. "But sometimes the right choice and the easy choice aren't the same thing. Your great-great-grandmother Elizabeth, she faced a choice like this once," Marcus said, settling into the rocking chair beside her. "During the Civil War, her husband came back from battle changed, angry, cruel with drink and despair. Everyone told her to leave him, take her children and go north. What did she do? She gave him one chance to choose who he wanted to be. Told him love wasn't about forgiveness without change. It was about believing someone could become who they were meant to be, if they wanted it badly enough." Victoria nodded, understanding. "And if Alexander chooses wrong?" Marcus smiled, his eyes twinkling with ancient wisdom. "Then you'll know you gave love every chance to win, and that's all any of us can do." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the Charleston sky in shades of pink and gold, Victoria felt her daughter kick strongly, as if in agreement. Whatever happened next, she would face it with a quiet strength that had carried the Qin women through generations of choices, each one defining not just their fate, but the fate of those they loved. The choice was no longer hers alone to make. Do you think Alexander will choose love over pride? And what would you do in Victoria's position? Give him one last chance or protect your heart? Share your thoughts below. These relationship crossroads are never easy. The morning sun streamed through the newly restored windows of Rosewood Manor, casting rainbows across the polished hardwood floors as Victoria stood in the grand foyer, her hand resting on her 8-month belly. The house had been transformed, not into something modern and sterile, but into a living, breathing testament to both its history and its future. The columns gleamed white against the Charleston sky, the gardens bloomed with careful restoration, and every room hummed with the quiet energy of a home being loved back to life. "Miss Victoria, he's here," Marcus announced softly from the doorway, his weathered face carrying a mixture of protectiveness and hope. Through the tall windows, she could see Alexander's rental car, not the usual chauffeured luxury sedan, but a modest sedan he was driving himself, pulling into the circular drive. Victoria nodded, her heart steady despite everything. The past month had been a whirlwind of revelation and transformation. The viral video of Alexander's emotional breakdown had humanized him in ways his corporate success never could, but more than that, it had shown her the man she'd fallen in love with years ago, vulnerable, real, and capable of growth. The custody arrangement they'd worked out through their lawyers was fair and focused on their daughter's well-being, but this meeting was about something deeper. She walked to the front door, her flowing white dress, simple but elegant, catching the morning breeze as she stepped onto the wraparound porch. Alexander emerged from the car, and she almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the armor of expensive suits and calculated confidence. He wore dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt, his usually perfect hair slightly mussed, his face carrying lines of exhaustion, but also something new, humility. "Victoria," he said softly as he approached the steps, his voice carrying none of its former authority. His eyes, those steel-gray eyes that had once seemed so cold, were warm with uncertainty and hope. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Alexander." She didn't come down the steps, not yet. This conversation needed to happen on her terms, in her space. "You look different." He managed a rueful smile. "I feel different. These past few weeks have been—" He paused, searching for words. "Humbling doesn't begin to cover it." The silence stretched between them, filled with the sounds of Charleston morning, birds singing in the ancient oaks, the distant sound of church bells, the whisper of Spanish moss in the breeze. It was Marcus who broke the moment, appearing with a tray of sweet tea and quietly setting it on the porch table before disappearing with diplomatic grace. "Would you like to sit?" Victoria asked, gesturing to the restored wicker chairs that faced the gardens. As they settled across from each other, she noticed how his hand shook slightly as he reached for the glass of tea. Alexander Kane, who had never shown uncertainty in his life, was nervous. "I need to say something," he began, then stopped, his composure faltering. "Actually, I need to say a lot of things, but I'm not sure where to start." "Start with the truth," Victoria said simply. "We never had much of that before." Alexander nodded, his throat working as he swallowed hard. "The truth is, I was terrified. When you told me about the pregnancy, when you started talking about slowing down, about what really mattered, I was terrified because you were right, and I didn't know how to be the man you needed me to be." He set down his glass, his hands clasping together. "I built my entire identity around being successful, being strong, being untouchable. And you saw through all of that. You saw me, and that scared me more than any hostile takeover or market crash ever could." Victoria felt her daughter shift inside her, as if responding to the emotion in the air. "So you pushed me away." "I destroyed us," he corrected, his voice breaking slightly. I convinced myself you were trying to trap me, that the pregnancy was about money or security, because that was easier than admitting I was falling apart. That I didn't know how to be a husband and father when I barely knew how to be human. The morning breeze carried the scent of magnolias and new beginnings as Victoria studied his face. She could see the boy he'd once been underneath the man he'd become, vulnerable, seeking approval, afraid of not being enough. And now I know what I lost. His voice was barely above a whisper. I lost my wife. I lost my family. I nearly lost my daughter before she's even born. And for what? A company that would replace me in a heartbeat? Money that can't hold you when you're scared or celebrate with you when you're happy. Alexander stood suddenly, moving to the porch railing where he gripped the painted wood with white knuckles. I've spent the last month learning what you already knew, that success without love is just expensive loneliness. Victoria rose slowly, her hand on her belly as she approached him. Alexander, look at me. When he turned, she saw tears tracking down his cheeks, the first tears she'd ever seen from him. I lost everything that mattered because I was too proud to admit I didn't know how to love you the way you deserved. You didn't lose everything, Victoria said softly. You lost your way. There's a difference. The hope that flared in his eyes was almost painful to witness. Victoria, I know I don't deserve it. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be undone. But if there's any chance, any possibility that we could try again. What would be different? She interrupted gently. What would you do differently this time? Alexander wiped his eyes, straightening slightly as he found his footing in this new version of himself. Everything. I resigned as CEO yesterday. Victoria's eyebrows rose in surprise. What? I'm staying on as chairman, but I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations. I want to be present for our daughter's life, for your life if you'll let me. I want to learn how to be a partner instead of a boss. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, not a ring box, but something smaller. This was my grandmother's. She left it to me with instructions that I should give it to the woman who taught me what love really means. He opened the box to reveal a delicate locket, old and clearly precious not for its monetary value but for its history. She was married to my grandfather for 63 years. She always said the secret was choosing love every day, especially on the days when it was hard. Victoria accepted the locket with trembling fingers, opening it to find a tiny photograph of an elderly couple, their faces creased with age and joy. They look happy. They were. Even when they fought, even when money was tight, even when life got complicated, they chose each other. Alexander's voice grew stronger, more certain. I want to choose you, Victoria. Every day. In sickness and health, in success and failure, in pride and humility. I want to choose our daughter, our family, our life together. The baby kicked forcefully, and Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her side. Instantly, Alexander was there, his hand hovering uncertainly near hers. Can I? She nodded, guiding his palm to where their daughter was making her presence known. The moment his hand connected with her belly, the baby seemed to calm, as if recognizing her father's touch. She knows you, Victoria whispered, wonder in her voice. I want to know her too. I want to know both of you. Really know you. His other hand came up to gently cup Victoria's face. I know I have to earn your trust back. I know it won't be easy. But I love you, Victoria. I've loved you since the moment you told me I was wrong about that merger 3 years ago, and then proceeded to prove it. Victoria laughed despite her tears. You hated that I was right. I hated that you were right and that it made me love you more. His thumb brushed away her tears. I was so busy protecting myself from feeling vulnerable that I forgot vulnerability is what makes love possible. As they stood there on the porch of Rosewood Manor, surrounded by the beauty Victoria had quietly created, the weight of their shared history and possible future hung between them like morning mist, fragile but full of promise. "I don't want the life we had before," Victoria said finally. "The parties, the pretense, the constant performance. If we do this, it has to be real." "I don't want that life either," Alexander replied. "I want this, porch swings and sweet tea, and knowing that at the end of every day, I get to come home to the people who matter most." Victoria stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, could see the sincerity in his eyes that she'd missed for so long. "It won't be perfect. We'll fight sometimes. We'll disagree. You'll probably still be stubborn and controlling. And you'll probably still be right most of the time and refuse to let me get away with it," he replied with a smile that transformed his entire face. "Probably," she agreed, rising up on her toes as he leaned down. Their kiss was soft, tentative at first, a question being asked and answered. But as Victoria's arms came up around his neck and Alexander's circled her waist, careful of their daughter between them, it deepened into a promise. A promise of second chances and new beginnings, of love that had been tested and refined rather than destroyed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "So what do you say, Mrs. Chincane? Ready to teach an old dog some new tricks?" "I think," Victoria said with a smile that lit up her entire face, "I'm ready to build something beautiful with you. Something real." As if in agreement, their daughter gave a mighty kick that made them both laugh. In the distance, Charleston's church bells began to ring, calling the faithful to worship, calling the lost home, calling lovers to remember what truly mattered. Marcus appeared on the porch as if summoned by their happiness, his face creased with joy. "Miss Victoria, should I prepare the guest room for Mr. Alexander?" Victoria and Alexander looked at each other, a whole conversation passing between them in a glance. They had work to do, trust to rebuild, patterns to break, love to nurture, but they had time. They had commitment. They had a daughter on the way who would grow up seeing what real love looked like. "Actually, Marcus," Victoria said, her hand finding Alexander's, "I think we're going to need to prepare the nursery. Together." As the morning sun climbed higher over Charleston, casting everything in golden light, Alexander Kane and Victoria Chun stood together on the porch of Rosewood Manor, no longer the people they had been, but not yet the people they would become. They were something new, a family choosing love over fear, vulnerability over pride, and each other over everything else. The Spanish moss swayed in the breeze like nature's blessing, and somewhere in the gardens, a mockingbird began to sing, not copying another bird's song, but creating something entirely its own. Just like them. What moment in Alexander and Victoria's journey touched your heart the most? Do you believe in second chances when someone truly changes? Share your thoughts about love, forgiveness, and new beginnings in the comments. Your stories might inspire someone else who needs to hear them.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you love this story, you will surely enjoy the next one. It's crazier and more intriguing as you can never imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.